Good afternoon. It's afternoon now. So I was asked to talk about the direction of labor markets, and so when I first thought about this, I thought maybe they wanted me to give a quantitative forecast of where labor markets are going, and then I quickly remembered the old joke that economists are here to make weather forecasts look good, so I'm not going to do that. But economics has also been called the dismal science before, and so true to that, I would qualify what I believe the direction of labor markets is, or the prospects of labor markets is bleak. And it's bleak for a number of reasons, I think. One is, as you've heard all morning long, the racial disparities are ubiquitous and they're persistent. And so people talk about the Great Recession, and now we're talking about the recovery, but I also read an article a year ago that they talked about this being a race session, because the impact of the recession on minorities is much more pronounced than for the general population. And in that context, I think we're not out of the race session yet. And you've heard a lot of the speakers this morning talk about that, so I'm not going to repeat some of the statistics, but you see it on the unemployment rates, right? And they talked about how it's doubled the unemployment rate, even when you control for everything, age, gender, education. Part of it is because the industries that minority workers are in, right? So Hispanics made a big portion of the construction industry, so they had huge job losses there. Blacks have a big percentage of the manufacturing industry, and so they had huge losses there. But it can't be explained by just that. I mean, there's discrimination that's always been going on and continues to go on. And I think one of the best examples of that is the first fired, last hired phenomena. And that is, if you look at the beginning of the recession, the unemployment rate of blacks started going up first, right? And even after, their unemployment is still longer and more persistent. And it's hard to try to explain that in a context that doesn't include some sort of institutional discrimination going on. Economists have tried to explain the wage gap in terms of differences in cognitive skills. Heckman and from Chicago and some of his co-authors are now looking at non-cognitive skills as explaining the wage gaps, or like, persistence to the job and attention to the job. But even if you give them that, when you look at the gap in unemployment rates, there's no evidence of any of these cognitive or non-cognitive skills, right? Lowell Taylor from Carnegie Mellon has a paper 2011 that shows that there's a case for statistical discrimination happening in unemployment rates. Another example of this is unemployment insurance discrimination, right? So the Urban Institute has a report that shows that blacks get rejected on their unemployment insurance claims at a higher rate, and even when they do get a claim approved, is at a lower level than whites, right? And so it's very difficult to explain these kind of gaps in terms other than some institutional discrimination. Another explanation that's been given out is spatial mismatch, right? Blacks live in urban centers and jobs are in the suburbs. Well, in 1960, 13% of blacks live in the suburbs. Today, 35% of blacks live in the suburbs, and you don't see the jobs matching any better than they did before, right? So it's bleak for that reason, that it's so ubiquitous and persistent, but what makes it even more bleak is the collective willingness to not address this, right? And especially at the federal level. We talk about the Obama administration, what they're going to do in this next term, but it reminded me of the Bush second term, and when George W. Bush won the second term, he said he had a lot of political capital and he was ready to spend it, and I don't think he realized how little capital he really had, and it was pretty much spent after the Medicare D plan. And so immigration reform is going to spend a lot of the president's capital. Gun reform is already spending a lot of the president's capital. The election is going to start again in 2 years. So I really don't see a whole lot of willingness at the national level to really look at these kind of racial disparities and inequalities in job markets. And the problem with that is when the federal government doesn't act, states act, right? And so if you're looking at some of the states' actions today, they're attacks on things that would help those racial disparities. Affirmative action is being attacked, right? And part of the reason is because we don't evolve our definition of affirmative action. Affirmative action should be not just preference in admission, but it should be preference in recruiting students. Carolyn Hawksby has a paper with her co-author Avery just recently published about how universities like Harvard are given essentially free, tuition and board to minority students. And I heard an interview with Hawksby last month, and she talked about how this year Harvard's incoming class is 1,600 students, and the increase in minorities was 15 students. And this is after giving full free tuition board to people making under 40, minorities making under 40,000. And part of the problem is that 70% of the minorities who go to these highly selective schools come from 50 metropolitan areas only, right? So they don't go out to where the high quality students are. And Hawksby's own research shows that even when you control for ability, selectivity improves your earnings, right? So the attack on affirmative action is real. It's not going to make things better, right? Another attack is on unions. You saw that in Wisconsin, and even though it had some challenges in the courts, other states are looking at how to continue attacking unions, which also is going to affect the problem. In education, charter schools, right? There's some studies showing that charter schools are increasing segregation. They're being used to segregate students. And there's a whole body of literature in economics of education showing that peer effects have an impact on outcomes, student peer effects, when you control for teacher ability. And so segregating students more is not going to help prepare them for those future jobs that require more education. But just staying on the thing of education, the other concern to me is that education bubble, the debt on the student loan debt that keeps growing and growing and growing, and the returns to that education is not there. Right? The returns to education is being questioned because a lot of these students that do graduate, like one of the panelists talked about, have to become underemployed or take jobs at pay cuts because they cannot find high-paying jobs in their fields. And what's troubling to me is that at the local level, officials have no problem giving tax breaks to corporations to have them move in because they're going to create jobs. But the jobs they're creating are not secure, high-paying jobs, right? So I'm from Arizona, which has a wonderful legislature, and I say that in the most facetious way possible, right? They're happy to give, they've been, the city of Glendale has been shelling money for the last 5 years to keep the Phoenix Coyotes hockey team in Glendale. And if they had spent any of that money in hiring teachers, providing, after-school care, right? They will make a much bigger impact than giving corporate welfare out. So for those reasons, I think the future is bleak for job markets, is because this collective unwillingness to tackle the problem head on. Thanks.